Welcome to episode 2 of the Matt Sager podcast. I'm Matt Sager. Did you have a nice week? Mine was eventful. In good ways. Almost exclusively good ways. Weekend wasn't terribly eventful. Got some work done. I'm working on a really cool audiobook that I'm actually really excited about. So I was working from the old home studio, and there was a street fair here in Greenwich Village where I live, and it's funny. I was born in New York City. I was born specifically in this neighborhood, Greenwich Village. I was born here, grew up here. I'm still here. I'm goddamn older than I'd like to admit. I've been around the block a couple of times, and yet I am still surprised when I see a flyer that says 8th Street. It's gonna be Disneyland mixed with Universal Studios and a little Madame Tussauds for good measure. It's just gonna be off the flippin' chain. And then you show up and it's a bunch of people selling irregular underpants. Irregular is not a brand, but like something went wrong at the Hanes warehouse and they're selling the extra underpants stock. And also maybe a henna tattoo place or two. And tourists, somehow, there is something magical about Greenwich Village. I think of the cover of the Bob Dylan album, and before he was revealed as a creep, the iconic opening credits of Louis. Stuff happens in my neighborhood, and it's totally mundane, regular, normal stuff, but simply by virtue of being here. It is sort of fascinating. New Yorkers are always sort of, especially, I don't mean this in a snobby way, but those of us who were born here, those of us who don't have a place anywhere else in the world to really call home, you feel a little bit like people are going, hey, look at the funny natives. And in many cases, they really are. I live in a building that's a historic landmark, and it's actually a pretty common occurrence for me to walk in and out of my building and have tour guides pointing at me like I'm an attraction. And I guess it would be one thing if they gave me treats or something, but they don't. They just make it unpleasant and difficult for me to get to where I need to go. So tourists, I love you. I'm sure you're doing great stuff for the economy, but I'm just a man. And the street fair is just irregularly priced underpants. I'm very sorry if I've shattered any illusions tonight. In any case, I apologize because I've meandered a little bit away from my original point, which is that the weekend, not terribly eventful. Especially when you compare it to last weekend, which was just nonstop news and announcements and drama coming out of San Diego Comic-Con, which is just the preeminent entertainment festival. They call it comic, but it is the entertainment expo that everyone's got to attend every year, and where you see all the announcements and trailers for the upcoming films and television series and games, and even sometimes actual comics from time to time. You know, the entertainment itself, almost all of it is based on comics at some level or another. There are Avengers movies, Deadpool movies, DC comic movies that hopefully you're going to be a little bit better than ones we've seen in recent past. I'll actually talk about that because it's looking pretty good in that department. The coolest thing for me about this year's con, I did not attend, but like a lot of people, I sort of virtually attended. Kept up with highlights on YouTube and Facebook, and honestly, having been to a lot of these cons, including a bunch recently here in New York, it's in many ways, if you're not super into meeting famous people for like a second, in many ways, this is a better way to experience it from the comfort of your home. Don't have to wait in line behind 50 cosplayers to pee. You can hear the audio. Nothing against these wonderful convention centers, but wow, the monitors in some of these rooms. So for me, this was the coolest thing in the world. The 10th anniversary Breaking Bad reunion panel, which was moderated by Bill Burr. Sure, I'd have loved to be in that room. If I could have gotten a seat and heard everything really well, yes, I would have liked to be there. But it was every bit as cool to experience it from home. I'll post a link to it in the description below. It is so awesome to see the entire gang back together. They all look amazing. And of course, Better Call Saul is going to return with season 4. And so Bob Odenkirk was there for that as well. And they had tons of new footage from that. And I was able to check that out over the weekend. And it looks amazing. I don't know why that show isn't more popular. I know that prequels, spin-offs are notoriously hit and miss. But Better Call Saul, in addition to being every bit as good as Breaking Bad, is its own animal. You don't have to have seen a single episode to really enjoy it as its own thing. And if you're a fan, I think it's madness that every single Breaking Bad fan is not watching Better Call Saul. You know, Star Wars fans get a lot of flack for seeing every dumb spin-off and sequel and prequel and unneeded chapter written by committee, but those are dedicated fans. If Breaking Bad fans had a third of that initiative, they'd find that they'd get more of a reward from Saul than your average Star Wars fan got out of, no offense, Solo. It's not like Solo in that you don't start off with this guy about whom you know everything, watch him do some stuff you've already heard him talk about, and then end the movie with him not having made any character transformations or grown in any significant way or changed the lens through which you view him. Because that's what Solo was to me. It's like, oh yeah. It was like the member berries from South Park. Oh yeah, now he's doing that thing he said he did, and now he's done with it. Has he learned? Has he changed? No, he's still the guy who will be Harrison Ford someday. Saul is a character who's all about arcs and redemption and then losing that redemption and then change and ultimately, really this epic downfall. But you really get to see how it began for him. Follow along on this journey that ends up intersecting with the through lines of a ton of other Breaking Bad characters. None of whom are showing up because it's, fan favorite. Look, again, I'm not trying to shit on Star Wars, but there's a lot of times in the last several movies where I've gone, oh, look, there's Boba Fett. I get it. I'm supposed to be excited. There's Boba Fett. In Better Call Saul, Mike and Gus have serious roles to play, as does Tuco and Tio Salamanca. All these major Breaking Bad fan favorite characters make appearances, and there's every reason to worry that, is this what they call fan service, where you see the guy and go, ooh, that's the guy who's gonna be in a wheelchair ringing a bell someday, yay, nostalgia. It's nothing like that. It is his story told in a different time, and it's the story of evolution and transformation, and really explores good and evil in ways very similar, and also in ways new and different than Breaking Bad. And I just can't recommend it highly enough, and I cannot wait for season 4 to premiere. So obviously I'm really excited about that. Marvel made not much of a showing this year. A bit out of character, and there's a weird story behind it. There always is, and there's always... I'll tell you about that in a minute, but DC made a stronger showing than I think people were expecting. They've not had a great run of it, with Suicide Squad and Batman vs. Superman and Justice League. I don't know anyone who has a really high opinion of those movies, and DC has got to be competing. If they're doing their job as Marvel's competitor, they need to be bringing a seriously strong game. And instead, it's just been dud after dud after dud. So they kind of needed to, this is starting to veer off into sports talk kind of, they really needed to bring their A-game territory, but they needed to bring their A-game, and they came with a bit of impressive stuff. Their offerings actually came in 2 categories, and the biggest one was film. They had trailers for Aquaman starring Jason Momoa, strangely the breakout star of Justice League, kind of by default, kind of because he's Jason Momoa and he's awesome. And it is a fresh take on the character, and Aquaman looks pretty cool. I liked it a lot. Check out the trailer online. And also check out Shazam. I'm frankly undecided. Most of the remarks I've heard have been slightly over-enthusiastic, frankly. People seem to just be amazed that Zachary Levi is showing any kind of humor at all and that he's working at all. And I'm a fan, and I'm a fan of Shazam. And I'm a fan of keeping things light at the appropriate time. And certainly DC has done a lot of darkness for the sake of darkness, and it's great that they're going to take a break from that. Darkness has a place, but it is not a be-all and end-all of a creative endeavor. You don't just paint it black and indulge in the nihilism. And that's what Zack Snyder's been doing. So Shazam looks like the anti, like a nod to that, like an acknowledgement to that, and also like an acknowledgement that Deadpool has been a surprise sleeper hit. And acknowledging that they need to attempt to embrace that ethos, that method of humor and action, that formula of combining the two in a way that works. Deadpool does make it look easy, but I should mention that the Avengers made it look easy too. And so just making an analog of the competition's product just following their formula. I understand why DC has to do it. Marvel goes with a team, they go with a team. Marvel highlights side stories of the characters that are going to be arcs that lead to the next films and the next phases of tentpole films. DC's got to do that, but first DC has to get their sea legs under them, and they haven't done that yet. So one of these movies needs to land well. It needs to stick the landing. It needs to prove that they're on a right footing. But it certainly seems like there's a decent chance of that being the case. And if not, that they at least are acknowledging that there's a need to right the ship. And there's a concerted effort going on to do that. So that's awesome. And hopefully Shazam and Aquaman will both be great films. I've got my fingers crossed. And then Marvel just had the weirdest weekend ever. They were basically the victims of a hate mob. I know there's a lot of different takes on that, but that's mine. What happened is that James Gunn, the director of Guardians of the Galaxy and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and the guy who, up until a couple days ago, was on IMDb listed as the director of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, has a Twitter history that I will conservatively describe as tricky. That's a good one. Tricky. You know, he got his start at Troma Films. I don't know if you're familiar with The Toxic Avenger, Tromeo and Juliet. I think he actually wrote or directed, or maybe both, Tromeo and Juliet. I think that was actually James Gunn's pre-Marvel claim to fame. And it's a great movie, and it is a masterpiece in just gross for being gross. The truth about Troma, I love it. I've got most of those movies. I attended them instead of going to high school growing up. But they don't have what you would call comedic nutritional value. They're not high art, and they're not intended to be. That's part of why they're fun. But they're an example of art that doesn't look good on the printed page. It has a lot in common with stand-up comedy in that sense. That in the right atmosphere and under the right conditions, where it's being viewed through a very specific lens by a very specific audience who understands irony and comedy and just crass trash. Adults can and should enjoy that. But again, if you were to transcribe that and put it in front of, say, a Senate subcommittee, it would look bad. Some of the nature of some of this humor, it is very, shall we say, taste hyper-specific. It is bespoke to a certain breed of scumbag like me. And so that's where James Gunn got his start. And Troma was a personality as well, not unlike Marvel back in the day, where Stan sort of was the stand-in for both the bullpen, where he'd tell you about the wacky exploits going on behind the scenes, and at the same time, he was such a ravenous fan. He was so excited about, Rip and Roy is tearing up old Jade Jaws in the pages of Defenders. Pick it up now. More on the next page. He was an ambassador to fandom as well. He made it seem as though there was very little difference between the talent and the readers themselves. And in some ways, there wasn't. They all shared this common sensibility, which actually at that time was considered pretty obnoxious. A couple decades prior to that whole mishmash, there was a Senate subcommittee that was about comics, and the industry was decimated in a way that it's only begun to recover from in the 21st century. So, yeah, context is an issue, and it's got a history with comics and creators, and with efforts to take them down. I don't want to name the guy who took out James Gunn. I will say he's definitely dangerous, because in the past he's done stuff like this, and a restaurant near the home of my stepfather was invaded by rifle-wielding lunatics as a direct result of this man's tweets. So I don't find them to be credible at all in any way. But what they did was to point out James Gunn's Twitter history, which I'm going to say a couple things. The first and really most germane fact about these tweets is that they came to light before he began filming Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. And there was a big issue where Disney was made aware of them at the time. I don't remember if it was for the same reason, where some guy called Gunn out, or whether Gunn came forward, or it might have been a marketing or PR guy behind the scenes at Disney who saw it and made a deal of it. There was an apology, and there was an acceptance of that apology, and Guardians of the Galaxy happened. And I know a lot of people loved both movies a lot, and we're looking forward to James Gunn doing Volume 3. But you know what I would have done if I were him when that Twitter scandal happened? Take the opportunity. You now know which tweets were problematic and are sitting there on the internet for anyone to see. And even though you've had this out with Disney, there's still ammunition to be used against you by the next guy at the next time. So if I'd been James Gunn, I'd have taken the tweets down. He didn't. And then, cut to 2018, we live in a very different world where things are so nasty and partisan that a Roseanne Barr will tweet something very upsetting and lose her job. And that becomes a chip on someone's shoulder. That becomes a mission to find one of theirs. One of theirs being someone who thinks it's absolutely normal in a healthy society that people who are racist are allowed to get fired for being publicly racist, using their platform of fame to espouse hate. It's funny. Marvel tried to kind of parody the far right with this Hydra storyline a couple years ago. And the story was terrible, but I actually really see where he was coming from in connecting those dots, because they are all about an eye for an eye. They're very much like the Hydra organization. Actually, the phrase that Hydra really uses in the books is, "Hail Hydra, cut off one limb and two shall take its place." And it's hokey and over the top, and it was written in the 60s by Stan and Jack and all those guys. But it still, sadly, is a ideology that some have. Be a bottom-feeding, shitty person. And when we get taken down, legitimately, go after them in a dirty, scummy way. Find a reason. Find a narrative that hurts them, amplify it, make it super loud, and then hit them where it hurts, which is HR, PR, marketing. Disney starts feeling pain in those areas, and they will act quickly and drastically, sometimes to their own detriment, and sometimes in a way that sets a dangerous precedent. And that's what happened here. This guy showed all these grotesque tweets from the timeline of James Gunn, and they are grotesque, and they're not funny. Like I said, there's really no reason for him to have left them up. There's no value. If he'd been really controversial and steadfast and loud and maybe even offensive and rude in the support of some cause that still held relevance today, that's a very good reason to have a complicated Twitter line. These were just really gross jokes about pedophilia, and there were something like 300 of them just sitting there. And it was a Friday. It's Comic-Con. The news had descended upon the comic and film community in a way like they really do only do this once a year. Comic-Con is the epicenter of everything. This was just, you couldn't target more journalists covering this kind of stuff under one roof at a better time. And that's part of why I believe it was calculated. I also feel that because apparently the guy's been gloating about, they took down one of ours, so I found one of theirs, and we're going to keep looking and keep going after them. And in fact, first off, James Gunn has been removed from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. He's going to be fine, and Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm sure, is going to be fine. If Marvel is smart, I really, really hope they do this. They ought to just bring over the wonderfully talented director of Thor Ragnarok. Just move him on over, give him more work, and the franchise will be fine. He's obviously got a handle for superheroes. He's got a handle for superheroes in space. He's established himself as being just wildly creative. And there is a way of, there's no version of James Gunn's firing that's positive. There's no version that doesn't suck. But the movie could go in an exciting new direction. In many cultures, crisis and opportunity can mean the same thing. Maybe creatively, at least, this could be that. Morally, it's reprehensible and, again, very dangerous. I understand they're already going after Dan Harmon for crap he's joked about, and it could be any of us. And please, let's try to not weaponize social media. Let's be nice to each other. And, if management brings you in because of your tweets, if they don't mean anything to you, if you're not still pointing them out to friends, if they're just pedophilia jokes, maybe after you apologize, take them down. We can't lose good people for stupid reasons. The world is not so full of creative geniuses that we can go around taking people who can launch and maintain a franchise based on ideas and characters that anyone else would have thought would have failed miserably. We can't afford to go losing talent of that caliber to hate mongers over their own dumb mistakes of a decade ago. So people, scrub your social media. It doesn't take much time, and any creative knows sometimes you've got to cut your jokes. Cut for time, cut for tone, but cut for all of our sakes. So that's one to grow on, kiddies. Hope you have a wonderful week. Follow me online. On Twitter, it's at Matt Sager. Facebook is Matt Sager VO. Follow me on Instagram at Real Matt Sager, and check out my reels, my blog, and all kinds of stuff going on with me at mattsagervoiceover.com. And I'll see you next week.